a new and splendid spirit of good fellowship springing up in adversity. Out of all this suffering, there is growing a harmony which we must carry forward into the days to come.
This is the BBC Home Service. We're interrupting programs to make the following announcement.
We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing.
Are just arriving.
Those we love most
But never really looked like fun.
Welcome to Hyde Park in London on the 50th anniversary of the day that peace broke out. Of course, the war was still raging bitterly in the Far East, but for the British people and their European neighbours, this was the day, 50 years ago, when 6 years of wartime fear, gloom, anxiety, despair lifted. Now, it's easy to forget how total the home war effort was. There were air raid shelters on any bit of spare land or convenient bomb site. Hyde Park, where I'm sitting now, was dug over with allotments of growing vegetables and looking after animals as well. Even places like the moat of the Tower of London became a vegetable garden, though that was surely more a matter of propaganda than an action that was going to win the war on its own. Dig for Victory was the campaign which encouraged all of us to grow our own food. This meant that the nation would be stronger, because the official food rations may have been fair and thorough, but they didn't actually leave stomachs feeling very satisfied. Now, VE Day itself 50 years ago was a pretty fair shambles. No one had had the time or inclination to organize it. The news of Nazi German unconditional surrender came when it did, and as it came the previous day, people took celebrations into their own hands. By 9 o'clock the previous night, as the Daily Mail recorded, London broke into victory life, suddenly, spontaneously, deliriously. But that was nothing compared to the great explosion of national euphoria that swept Britain when Churchill proclaimed a brief moment of rejoicing. Crowds packed the streets, bringing traffic to a standstill. People laughed, cried, sang, embraced and danced. The pubs, well stocked for the occasion, remained open and overflowing in towns and villages everywhere. The hero of the hour and of the war was Winston Churchill, who was cheered to the skies wherever he went. But people also wanted the King and Queen, symbols of the values and hopes for which they had been suffering and fighting for so long. Down Whitehall and through Trafalgar Square and from every direction, the crowd surged towards Buckingham Palace. And of course, Buckingham Palace is the focus of this morning's commemorations, where Jill Dando and Tom Fleming are watching the crowds of 1995 replay the scenes of 1945 in their own way.
Well, as you can see, huge crowds here at Buckingham Palace. They've been gathering since 8 o'clock this morning. Upwards of 100,000 people are expected here to see the Queen Mother come out onto the balcony just before 20 to 1. Followed a minute later by the Queen and Princess Margaret, just as they did 50 years ago today. The stage is set as well for a concert. Dame Vera Lynn, Sir Harry Secombe and Cliff Richard will be performing, and there'll be a fly past by numerous military aircraft as well. Of course, 50 years ago, spontaneity was very much the name of the day, the word of the day. As news filtered through about victory in Europe, people gathered, they ran down the Mall towards the palace. Today's event, though, much more organised than that, but scenes very reminiscent of 50 years ago. And here to guide us through the commemoration today is Tom Fleming, a familiar name, but perhaps not such a familiar face on these occasions. Tom, now you've commentated on numerous national state occasions over the years, but VE Day brings back some very personal memories for you, doesn't it?
Yes, I've been on some great occasions here in front of Buckingham Palace, very moving ones too, but None of them are etched so clearly in my mind as that evening of Victory in Europe Day 50 years ago. I suppose there are several reasons for that. I'd just come back from the Far East on the 4th of May. I'd volunteered as a young actor to go and entertain the troops in Southeast Asia, poor souls, and I'd flown back in a Sunderland flying boat, landed or alighted in Poole Harbour, came up by train from Bournemouth to London, and suddenly saw that all the lights were on. First time in my life I'd ever seen lights on in the streets of London. And so we knew that the end of the war in Europe was close. I was staying with friends in Hampstead. One of these friends had just lost her younger brother on the 6th of April, shot down over Europe, serving in the RAF, just 4 weeks before VE Day. We all listened for Churchill's speech on the 8th of May, and then I came up to the West End in the company of a girl who'd also lost her husband just at Christmas. And we made instinctively for the Cenotaph, first of all. We heard Churchill make his speech in Whitehall, then we moved to Trafalgar Square, and then came down the Mall. 250,000 people. And, you know, one looked around and one thought, well, some of these people, a lot of these people, still have loved ones serving in danger in the Far East. Some of these people have lost persons very close to them and dear to them. And victory was not the beginning of a great new world for them. And yet somehow everybody was extremely happy. And at the end of the day, where would we come to but this place here? I suppose we were coming to say really thank you to the King and Queen for what they'd come to mean to us during the dark and dangerous days when our whole world seemed to be trembling in the balance.
Tom Fleming with his personal views of 50 years ago. And all those years ago, the people, the nation, they were all released from the pent-up tension of war. It's easy now to say that Hitler was defeated from the time that Britain stood firm in 1940 or the time he turned on the Soviet Union in 1941. It didn't feel like that at the time. 50 years ago, our parents and grandparents were only too aware of the distance that they had come to victory.
Britain alone, for 18 months before America came into the war, effectively surrounded except for the Atlantic lifeline, U-boats attacked to bring the country to her knees. Alan Byrne fought to regain control of the Atlantic.
All the guns were firing at it, and once again we got so close that the guns wouldn't bear, and then the bow went up and it came right down the middle of this U-boat and rolled it over, and you could see the U-boat passing under the ship, rolling over as we went over the top of it.
But Britain's only way to strike the German heartland was bomber command. Planes on their own in the darkness, converging over the target. To James Verran, a flash in the night would mean the end.
Shattering, to think that if you saw the whole thing explode in midair, to think that there were 7 chaps going down the drain. After you got into briefing or debriefing, and on the wall you would have all the names of the crews, and you could see those that had landed and those who were still to land.
The Allied assault to set Europe free was made possible by taking the air-war to Germany and winning the Battle of the Atlantic. But like everyone, Austin Baker was surprised to survive the Battle of Normandy.
We'd lost 6 tanks out of the squadron in one morning, and we couldn't go forward or back. The Tyneside Scottish was the infantry regiment with us, and they retreated from the battlefield, Tessel Wood, behind a piper, which I hadn't seen before, and there was something very melancholy and symbolic about retreating piper with the men following. And I thought it's time to get out for a bit at that point.
Men didn't have time to dwell on the death of friends. On another raid deep into Germany, James Verran's luck ran out. A fighter shattered his aircraft.
I fell out. I then had to use my fingers to prise my eyelids open, which had been burnt. I was burnt all around the eyes. And then finally I saw the D-ring, which was spinning around in front of me. And having pulled the D-ring, the parachute released and opened.
Bomber Command lost more than all the British Army officers killed in the First World War. Atlantic also took its toll. Many who fought never went to sea again. Few fighting men got through the war unscathed.
Sam Weaver was wounded in Normandy, and he said, well, I shall be all right now because there's only one round with your name on it. But in fact, quite near the end of the war, his tank was blown up and all the crew except the commander were killed, including Sam. And so it just illustrated the point, I suppose, that you can have two with your name on. But fortunately, obviously there wasn't one with my name on, and here I am.
For those who are not with us, buried in one of the final resting places for British servicemen killed in northwest Europe, weapons are just pieces of wood and iron. The battles are fought and won by people, and it is people who pay the price.
And everyone was aware of those sort of feelings. But at home, despite that, one of the features of the victory celebrations was the street party. It represented everything that wartime restrictions, from the blackout to the officious air raid warden, had squashed. Now, Portsmouth is recreating something of that spirit this weekend, so let's hear how they're going about it from Howard Stableford.
We'll meet again, don't know where, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Just around 3/4 of an hour's time, the crowd's still coming in to take part in that marvellous route.
There are thousands and thousands of song sheets everywhere. I don't know whether you've seen the song sheets, but try to get hold of one. And to lead us on this very special day, we have some special people. So will you welcome, first of all, the Archgoon, Neddy Seagoon, alias Sir Harry Secombe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to be here on this wonderful occasion. I always like playing to small audiences. Hey! I hope you can all sing in my key. Thank you. Hup.
Okay. And now, someone who was born during the war and has spent most of his time since firmly in the charts, Cliff Richard, OBE.
Don't stop, don't stop.
It's great to be here. We had the most wonderful evening on Saturday night. Look at it today. It's beautiful. I can't think of anywhere in the world I'd rather be than here, and I'm sure this is going to be a great sing-along.
Thank you, Cliff. And finally, who else but someone whose voice throughout the war years meant so much to so many people far away, then the force's sweetheart, in fact, everybody's sweetheart, Dame Vera Lynn.
Everyone. Well, I'm very proud and very happy to be what's going on? To be here on this wonderful day of celebration. Now, we're going to start off with a song that I'm sure you all know. So let's raise the roof. That's if we had one. Roll out the barrel.
Sing, boom, tararo, bring down the song.
how to do it. We'll keep a welcome. Keep a welcome in the hillsides. We'll keep a welcome in the vales. This land will still be singing when you come home again to Wales. This land of ours will keep a welcome, and with a love that never fails, we'll kiss away each hour of here life when you come home again to Wales. We'll kiss away each hour of here life when you come home again to
You are an unbelievable voice. I know there's people behind the memorial all the way down the mile. If you can't see us, we can in fact feel you there. I was really glad to be involved with a film called Summer Holiday. So all you war babies, here we go with Summer Holiday. All going on a summer holiday, no more working for a week or two. Fun and laughter on a summer holiday, no more worries for me or you. For a week or two, we're going where the sun shines brightly. We're going where the sea is blue. We're seated in the movies. Now let's see if it's true. Everybody has a summer holiday, doing things they always wanted to. So we're going on a summer holiday to make our dreams come true. For me and you. Well done.
Hold on, lads, come on!
Let's hear it for the band.
Yeah! Now here's a good song to sing outside the palace. If I Rule the World. Every heart would have a new song to sing, and we'd sing of the joy every morning would bring. If I ruled the world, every man would be as free as a bird. Every voice would be a voice to be heard. Take my word, we will treasure each day that occurred. My world will be a beautiful place where we would weave such wonderful dreams. My world would wear a smile on its face like the man in the moon has when the moon beams. If I rule the world, every man would say the world was his friend. Every happiness that no man could end. No, my friend, not if I
Well, now here's one that the boys sang all over the world. Bless them all. Bless them all, bless them all, the long and the short and the tall. Bless all the sergeants and W01s, bless all the corporals and their wicked sons, 'cause we're saying goodbye to them all, and back to the village they crawl. You'll get no promotion this side of the ocean, so cheer up.
Question of, do you come here often? Yes, every 50 years.
One of the many melodies that we all loved to sing during the war, and one that the boys always used to think was a little bit of England, Nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. That certain night, the night we met, there was magic abroad in the air. There were angels dining at the Ritz, and a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I may be right, I may be wrong, but I'm perfectly willing to swear that as you turned to smile at me, the nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. The moon that lingered over London town, poor puzzled moon, he wore a frown. How could he know we two were so in love? The whole darn world seemed upside down. The streets of town were paved with stars. It was such a romantic affair. And like an echo far away, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square. I know 'cause I was there that night in Berkeley
And we have another one, I think, if you turn the page. Oh, now we're down to here, and it is the next part of the proceedings. We're cutting the next one, and we're saying we're waiting now for someone very special. Someone the whole nation loves. Someone who had a unique place in all our hearts. Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. We all wondered what we could sing to her, and after the fanfare, congratulations! are in order.
And what a moment for this most favourite lady. A moment of conflicting emotions, I'm sure. Married to her Bertie for 29 years, widowed for 43 years. Unique in the affections of the British people, loved by all generations, and in every corner of the Commonwealth of Nations to which her travels have taken her as Duchess of York, as Queen, and as Queen Mother.
Now, congratulations are in order just for being who she is, especially for the Queen Mother.
Congratulations and celebrations when I tell everyone that you're in love with me. Congratulations and jubilations. I want the world to know I'm happy as can be. Who would believe that I'm happy and contented? I used to think that happiness hadn't been invented, but that was in the bad old days before I met you. Honey, when I let you walk into my heart, everybody, congratulations and celebrations when I tell everyone that you're in love with me. Congratulations and jubilations. I want the world to know I'm happy as can be. Congratulations and celebrations when I tell everyone that you're in love with me. Congratulations and jubilations. I want the world to know I'm happy as can be. I want the world to know I'm happy as can be.
Your Majesties, Your Royal Highness, welcome to our little party. Here's a song I know you all know very well, The White Cliffs of Dover. I'll never forget the people I met, braving those angry skies. I remember well as the shadows fell, the light of hope in their eyes. And though I'm far away, I sometimes hear them say, thumbs up, for when the dawn comes on, there'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover. Tomorrow, just you wait and see. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after. Tomorrow, when the world is free, the shepherd will tend his sheep, the valley will bloom again, and Jimmy will go to sleep in his own little room again.
I don't know about bluebirds flying over, but here's the Royal Navy's redoubtable Swordfish, piloted by Lieutenant Commander Lord. Small single-engine biplane used by the Fleet Arm as a naval reconnaissance aircraft, string bag. And that's followed by four-engine
Thank you, Dame Vera. Ladies and gentlemen, what more fitting sight could there have been than the wonderful old Swordfish flying over Buckingham Palace while the last part of that song was being sung. Here comes the Taylorcraft Auster overhead. It's flown
and this is the
today by
Auster,
Major Ian Cornwall,
used by the Army Air
AFC.
Corps as an artillery spotter plane, the light communications aircraft in the Second World War. It zooms over Buckingham Palace. And the next to come will be the Harvard. Harvard was used during the war as an advanced twin-engine trainer plane. And everybody now looking up into the sky as the flypast goes over. Firefly, 1,700 of these were built, became operational in 1943. Naval fighter reconnaissance aircraft. The next one everybody will recognize, I think, a Bristol Blenheim, used by the RAF as a night bomber in the early years of the war. This is the only one still flying. Here it comes. Through a sort of barrage of red and white and blue balloons that's been let go by the crowd. I don't think that'll worry Mr. Romain, who's piloting the Blenheim. And here's the Catalina, a CAT for short, a flying boat used on long-range patrols for air-sea rescue, anti-submarine warfare. 578 of these were delivered to the RAF. Isn't that a wonderful sight? Perhaps they'll come back into their own, these lovely craft. And now the most famous workhorse of them all. The DC-3, the Dakota. Flown in one of these many, many times, and they're still in use around the world. Wonderful aircraft. Giving a little waggle of the wings, a little salute as it approaches Buckingham Palace. A smile from both queens, and now a Lancaster. Heavy four-engine bomber of the RAF, used on the first 1,000 bomber raids and on the famous Dam Busters raid. There's the view from the cockpit. One of only two airworthy Lancs from the 7,377 that were built. Driving right up the middle of the Mall. There she goes. What a splendid sight. And the flags are waving down below. I hope they can see it from up there in the air. Another famous plane, the B-17, which was the American bomber known to everybody as the Flying Fortress. And they were based all around East Anglia in the war years. Loved by crews for its ability to get them home, even though they were severely damaged. Now the Mitchell bomber, also used by the British for general reconnaissance. And then the Mosquito. Light bomber, night fighter, twin-engined, made of plywood. actually faster than a Spitfire and has the same bomb load as a Flying Fortress. This twin-engined aircraft, distinctive twin tailplanes, usually called Lightnings, or P-38s. And now, Orca Hurricane, without the Spitfire, which is its usual companion, another aircraft pilots love to fly. First came into service with the RAF in 1938. Then a Meteor. That's the Hurricane. The Meteor was one of the first jet fighters, the only plane at the end of the Second World War which was fast enough to catch up with the and shoot down the B-1s or doodlebugs. And last of all, as the march past of the Royal Air Force sounds from the forecourt of Buckingham Palace, comes the RAF aerobatic team, the Red Arrows. They'll be flying 360 knots at an altitude of 1,000 feet. That's the Meteor. Song coming in on a wing and a prayer. The prayer bit is always the commentators that he gets the aircraft right. Well, here at the Red Arrows, information catching the sunlight right along the Mall. And they'll be with us at Buckingham Palace now. And there goes the smoke, red, white and blue. And it lays in trails like the old bunting fetched from bottom drawers and cupboards for the VE Day celebrations so long ago. At 1:30 in the morning of VE Day, there was the most enormous thunderstorm over London. Well, today the flashes and bangs come from the roof of Buckingham Palace. And here they are, some of them coming down in with parachutes. And the Queen is probably saying, I hope somebody will go up and have a look at the roof later. Well, there's a very British scene. Fireworks in daylight that you can hear rather than see. But the beacons and the bonfires come later. And so now it's time for some unashamedly patriotic songs. Well, the Queen Mother doesn't need a song sheet, that's for sure.
Glory. Join in again. Mother of the free.
The national anthem. Wonderful scenes here all around the Queen Victoria Memorial. It's like the last night of the proms, only more so. Every wave acknowledged by the crowd. I remember that so well from 50 years ago. And how little we wanted them to disappear through that doorway. And then comes the great debate. Will they, won't they come out again? If commentators had medals for every time they asked themselves that question, stuck in a crowd outside Buckingham Palace, they'd be top-heavy with decorations for unoriginality. Well, will they? I don't know. We look for a touch of a net curtain, an open door. We look for the signs. And we hear the sound of the pipes playing Mogahe My Home, which was a great favorite of King George VI. I remember that the vast crowds outside the palace on the 8th of May 1945 suddenly fell quiet at 9 p.m. as the voice of their king, broadcasting to the nation, came to them over the loudspeakers. Perhaps let it come to us now like an echo of things remembered.
at this hour, when the dreadful shadow of war has passed far from our hearts and homes in these islands, we may at last make one pause for thanksgiving and then turn our thoughts to the tasks all over the world which peace in Europe brings with it. And let us remember those who will not come back. Their constancy and courage in battle, their sacrifice and endurance in the face of a merciless enemy. Let us remember the men in all the services and the women in all the services who have laid down their lives. We have come to the end of our tribulation, and they are not with us at the moment of our rejoicing. And then let us salute in proud gratitude the great host of the living who have brought us to victory. I cannot praise them to the measure of each one's service, for in a total war, the efforts of all rise to the same noble height, and all are devoted to the common purpose. Armed or unarmed, men and women, you have fought, striven, and endured to your utmost. And the Queen and I know the ordeals which you have endured throughout the Commonwealth and Empire. We are proud to have shared some of these ordeals with you, and we know also that together we shall all face the future with stern resolve and prove that our reserves of willpower and vitality are inexhaustible. There is great comfort in the thought that the years of darkness and danger in which the children of our country have grown up are over, and please God, forever.
And so, the years roll away.
Can we all give 3 cheers for the royal family? Hip hip! Better than that, hip hip! And loudest of all, hip hip!
And suddenly there's a mother and her 2 daughters on that balcony, which they graced 50 years ago, 8 times in all, until their last appearance at midnight. And how typical of Queen Elizabeth to come back out and give the crowds another chance to see her. the bands play on as the Queen and Princess Margaret make their way down to meet some of those who are in the forecourt. For the Queen and Princess Margaret, VE Day was unforgettable too, as the Queen vividly recalls.
I remember the thrill and relief after the previous day's waiting for a Prime Minister's announcement of the end of the war in Europe. And my parents went out on the balcony in response to the huge crowds outside. I think we went on the balcony nearly every hour, 6 times. And then when the excitement of the floodlights being switched on got through to us, my sister and I realized we couldn't see what the crowds were enjoying. My mother had put her tiara on for the occasion, so we asked my parents if we could go out and see for ourselves. I remember we were terrified of being recognized, so I pulled my uniform cap well down over my eyes. A grenadier officer amongst our party of about 16 people said he refused to be seen in the company of another officer improperly dressed. So I had to put my cap on normally. We cheered the King and Queen on the balcony and then walked miles through the streets. I remember lines of unknown people linking arms and walking down Whitehall, all of us just swept along on a tide of happiness and relief. I remember the amazement of my cousin, just back from 4.5 years in a prisoner of war camp, walking freely with his family in the friendly throng. And I also remember when someone exchanged hats with a Dutch sailor, a poor man coming along with us in order to get his cap back. After crossing Green Park, we stood outside and shouted, "We want the King." And we were successful in seeing my parents on the balcony, having cheated slightly because we sent a message into the house to say we were waiting outside. I think it was one of the most memorable nights of my life.
Memories of VE Night 50 years ago from Her Majesty the Queen. The tri-service mass bands are under the direction of Major Bob Garrity, Blues and Royals. And the forecourt is filled not only with veterans and with children of the nations, but also with many members of the royal household from royal estates all over the country. But see how the crowds have grown now. I think probably the fly-past does it, you know, and everybody comes and thinks something will be happening. I don't know how much the ladies and gents at the Admiralty Arch end of the Mall saw, but this is certainly an occasion that few here will forget. The pipers of the Scots Guards. It so happens that the guard mounted at Buckingham Palace this morning is found by the 1st Battalion Scots Guards. Ah, I just caught that kiss. I wonder what they think about the days that we are remembering. And that tune is My Home. Well, the Queen at the moment is passing along the corridors of her home here at Buckingham Palace, making her way to the Privy Purse door, where she will meet some of the performers. Her Majesty talking to them. Now, Major Michael Parker, who's arranged everything and who's blocking our view. That's the accompanist, Dame Vera. Ken, the keyboard, he's known to us as. And the Queen Mother, who always has a word for everybody. And there's Bob Holness. And meantime, while the Queen Mother spends time with the artists inside, the Queen and her sister are due to come down to the forecourt, where the 800 children, 450 veterans, 900 members of the royal household and their families are waiting, hoping for a closer glimpse of the two sisters. So there you are, singing, waving crowds all around the Queen Victoria Memorial still, and up the Mall and in the gardens round about and in the parks. 14 weeks after the E-Day, just 6 days before Princess Margaret's 15th birthday, all these singing, waving, happy crowds were outside the palace railings once again. This time to celebrate victory in the Far East and the ending, after nearly 6 years, of the most costly war in the history of humankind.
Extraordinary scenes. You can't help feeling that the size of that crowd itself was a kind of tribute to the celebrations, the commemorations that occurred 50 years ago. That was surely the largest street party we'll ever see. It's Street Party Day today, but in a way size doesn't come into it. They're taking place in Portsmouth. There'll be more celebrations in Hyde Park this afternoon. The crowds from the Mall and outside Buckingham Palace will undoubtedly move on here. Even more this evening, climaxing though in a moment of solemnity, a very important one, the 2-minute silence for the dead of World War II and the ceremony of lighting the victory beacons. That will be led by the Queen in the grand finale starting at 8:30. So break off from your celebrations if you're having them, as I hope you are. To witness ours, join in with us at any time throughout the day. From Hyde Park, goodbye for the moment.